Pharmaceutical Processing, in conjunction with Interfex 2018, presents Interfex Live.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the afternoon session of Interfex Live. So, no sleeping after lunch, rule number one. Okay. Having said that, we got a pretty interesting way we're going to start off, and we got Annette Kreuger here from Industrial Information. Did I get that right?
Industrial Info-Resources.
Info-Resources. And we're going to talk about where we see this going over the next year and next year and a half, and we're going to talk about pharmaceutical intelligence. Now, some people argue that there isn't any intelligence in pharmaceuticals, but I beg to differ. Anyway, competitive intelligence, pharmaceutical intelligence. In my career, I've always found that was a big hole. We go chasing the elusive butterfly, spending money and with no sense as to where we want to go in the end. So I think people underestimate the quality of intelligence, pharma intelligence. Having said that, Annette, why don't we start by talking, what sectors of the industry right now are experiencing the most growth? Why don't we start there?
All of the above.
That's a good answer.
It's a good answer, and it's true.
But you have to be a little more expanding on it.
Okay. Right now, with it's funny, a lot of industries you can say that's a driver, or this is, something negative affecting it. In pharma, with all of the influx going on, pick up any newspaper, price controls, emerging markets, new clients, all of this is feeding the industry for different reasons. What could be a constraint in one market is a driver in another market. I'm seeing a lot of activity in APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients, the things that make a drug work. It's in every drug you take. It's that one ingredient, or two, depending on how complex the drug is, that makes it effective in your body to do what it was designed to do. Originally, APIs were, for many years, offshored to India and China, and then put into drugs to be sold into the domestic market. We ran into some regulatory problems with bad manufacturing processes. It's one thing to have a drug approved by the FDA following, that's Food and Drug Administration. I don't want to assume everybody knows that, but it is. But you can't put a bad ingredient in a good drug. And they were running into a lot of problems with that. So what's happened is that some of that's come back to North America. A few years back, you wouldn't have seen it. Somebody said, well, the days of any API production in the States is gone. Novartis is spending $1 billion saying otherwise for its active ingredient for insulin in the Mid-Atlantic. So it's interesting. That's another thing about this industry. What is true right this moment might not be true tomorrow. Something else is going to pop off and change it. But API production, another sector, and the sectors change, unlike other industries. You might jump from active ingredients, part of the drug itself, to the manufacturing of drugs. CMOs and CROs, contract manufacturing, contract research, as they have been, they're growing, and they're going to continue to grow for a multitude of reasons.
So the CMO and the CRO definitely is going to see an uptick. There's going to be a growth industry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's, again, all you could hear was, there's overcapacity, they're not going to grow, there's enough, we got too much. Well, that's not so true. I mean, it might be true for some, but not for certain other products that they have to manufacture. And in today's marketplace, especially when you get into biologicals, it's not as big of a run as the old-time blockbuster drugs, where you're going to sell 1 million doses. You're going to sell less doses for a lot more money. So they don't need this big, huge manufacturing plant, and especially on the clinical scale. CMOs are enjoying that, coming in and saying, we'll do it while you're going through development. We'll help you with process development. We'll help you through clinical. And you know what? depending on how big of a run, we'll help you through commercial scale. So yeah, I don't see that just keeps growing.
Do you see now a lot of CMOs, CROs partnering up with the startups or the venture capital guys and saying, hey, if it goes to phase 2, I'm going to ante up and we're going to go the route?
There's some of that coming. And they like the acronyms. I mean, there's CRM, DMOs, there's 10 million different names, whatever anybody can dream up. I'm actually surprised there hasn't been more of that, Russ. Because they've got it. They've got they're putting these in place, and a lot of them are starting their own manufacturing, but then that causes a little bit of blowback from some of their clients because I'm entrusting you for my company to do this. What the heck are you doing over there for your own profitability, your own drug? So there's some trust issues involved.
So are we talking about IP? What are we talking about here?
Across the board, drug companies are secretive at best. They're very
really.
Yeah, can you believe it?
No.
They don't like to discuss what goes on. And when people ask how do we get our data, I always say think investigative journalism, because this is not, you don't call up Pfizer and say, so what are you doing? What's going on, guys? How much are you going to spend to make those drugs, and where are you going to do it? But when I entrust a product line for you to manufacture, I've got to have assurances, and a lot of them have gone out to contract manufacturing that wouldn't have done it. Everything was in-house. In the old days, everything was in-house. You had a huge manufacturing complex, and it's all mine, and we're not going to talk about it with anybody. Now there's partnerships, and they're outsourcing this, and so, but that's not to say that that's not a trend that's going to evolve, because Skanska did that. They were building research labs for other companies, and all of a sudden they thought, well, let's build one for us, and we'll lease it out. So there is crossover. If there's money to be made and you've got a product that you can supply to the marketplace, they'll go for it.
Well, let's. So, am I right in assuming that we're going to see the CMOs, CROs, or whatever O's we got? A lot of that stuff's coming home now, and rather because that was going offshore too.
Well, the traditional CMOs and CROs that have been here in the States, North America, and when I'm speaking North America, you can almost mirror this in Western Europe, in another mature market. The similarities between the two are there. It's another mature market. I mean, there's other things affecting them that don't affect us yet as much here, but they're more willing to expand because they've got the business here, and there's certain niches. I mean, you've proved your bones to me. You've proved that I can get this to market on time. It's coming out. There's no 483s. Those are lovely letters that the FDA sends out that nobody wants ever, and you don't ever really want to read them before you need medication. Okay. They don't want a 483 at their contract manufacturer nor in their own plant. And it's easier to monitor these plants when they're here from sheer manpower. No matter how many inspectors the FDA has, no matter how much money they throw at it, they're not in these plants as much as they need to be or you would imagine them to be. And when you multiply that overseas, it just leads to problems.
So let's look at that. Let's look at it from another standpoint. You brought a great point up. So there's been, I call them, there's a lot of boneyards out there. So the question is, there's a lot of capacity that's laying fallow, but there's still people thinking about buy, build, or may start from scratch. So what's the trend now? I mean, all the facilities that are, that have gone fallow, people, what are they doing? They building and they moving, or what are they doing?
Both. They're building new and they're retrofitting old facilities. A lot of those companies that I touched on briefly, I'll say India. You'll have an Indian drug firm that they don't want to lose their market share. They don't want to lose it, but they also, if you can't get your product, they closed. They stopped production and said, you can't sell this. We're not buying it. You're not shipping it. So some of these companies have come over to the States and they've bought in these plants that were shut down by big pharma. New York and New Jersey got hit hard since 2009 when they were having all of this. There was a horrible title that popped up. It was called a rationalization director. And that was their job, to look at all their plants and say, do we want it? Or can we get away with this one? And plants started to shut down because there was overcapacity. There still is in some cases. So what these companies have done, for pennies on the dollar, they'll come over and buy a manufacturing plant that needs to be retrofitted, and they can make their APIs. Or most of what I'm seeing in the New York, New Jersey area with these older facilities that were just shut down are generics, generic manufacturing for this market, for the domestic market. Because as much clamor as there is for the highly specialized cell-based biologics, well, there's generics are needed too, especially with all of the cost pressures coming. So what is really good, though, not only are they buying these plants and maybe spending $5 to $10 million to retrofit them up to today's standards, they're expanding. They're building new. They're buying land. And we didn't see that coming. Nobody really saw it coming, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful for the economy. They're using, it used to be that foreign-owned companies would use all their engineers back home. All their equipment would come from back home. So then you'd say, well, what good is that for us? Well, it's almost like when you move into a new neighborhood. First, stick with what you know, and then you start reaching out to the neighborhood and the locals and the companies that exist here. So it's, yeah, that's a definite trend.
Along those lines, then, it's like investment into something mature that I know versus I'm gonna be an emerging market. I want to go out there. I'm going to put my investments on the long shot. I mean, venture capital guys, I think they seem to lean toward the thing where they're going to get the big money shot, as opposed to the guy who comes in with the nuts and bolts. But pretty much from your standpoint, are people invested in mature or are they invested in emerging? What do you think?
Well, it depends on what your angle is for that. When you say are they investing, are you talking the companies themselves or from a investment, a dollar, like I want to invest in a company where they're growing? I mean, if you're looking at that, I'm going to go after, I always find it's not the big flashy investments that should get your attention all the time. It's not, I mean, it's not Novartis building a $2 billion API plant. That's great, and that's wonderful. That speaks a lot. I want to see the company that's spending $1 million or $2 million on their labs, that are spending, they're going to a CMO and putting in a dedicated production line. They've signed an agreement for clinical manufacturing to get that through all the phases. Because those companies are going to do one of two things if they have a good drug. They're either going to become a full-blown company and build their own manufacturing, or more likely be bought. And that's everybody's dream, is to have somebody with some very deep pockets buy them.
Or to flip your compound in phase 2 for $200 million.
There you
that's
go.
The other dream world.
There you go.
So having said that, I mean, just from your sense, and again, this is an opinion. I mean, I've never ceased to be amazed when you're going around for capital funding.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're not talking Novartis giving me money to do. No,
right.
We're talking guys who have cash. You go to them, and you got a compound. Gets back to what I said before, and it's 1 + 2 is 3. All right. And then you have the long shot where, gee, I really don't know how I'm going to do that. And yet I find that the venture guys jump on this stuff. So what's the thinking here? I mean,
why do you bet on a horse? Sometimes it's a feeling, because you just don't know what's going to work. What's going to be that magic bullet? What's going to be an oncology therapeutic that might save lives? That's big. That's very big. And there will be losses. I can't tell you how many things get scrapped. You know as well as I do, probably better than I do, on how many things get right up to it. It's no good. And if it's a major drug, there's $2 billion could be invested in trying to get that to market. There's no formula to it. Because I'm like you. I'm sometimes, how did they get funding? Where'd they get that money?
Mm-hmm.
It just really depends. A lot of times they'll look at the science behind it, the actual people doing it. It's interesting if you look at the melding of industries right now. Google, we all know Google. Their life science division is scary big in what they've got their hands in. So you've got a lot of two things that don't have anything to do with each other, but they understand that same, it's seeing a potential, it's seeing a risk and going with it. Sometimes that's as scientific as it gets.
So we're looking at the long shot with the big payback.
Because when it pays, it pays big.
Okay.
It pays big. You're not going to make a lot of money in generics. You're
No.
selling something a million times for $1. That's what's going to happen when we do price controls. Here, you can have these. All right, you can have all these drugs. We don't really care about them. Just don't touch the one that's $50,000 a dose that needs to be taken every day or 3 times a day for $21,000. And they're doing it. I mean, that's...
Let's talk about price controls. Do they hinder project development?
You know,
What's the deal? I mean,
we're okay. I mean, we're going to have some here in North America. But there's so much arguing about it because it's not only the federal government setting the price controls and all of this. There's so many different ways to get our drugs. You've got the insurance companies. You've got, I mean, it's not like I make a drug and then sell it to you to take. There's so many layers between it. But the general consensus, what I get from everybody I talk to, and distilling all that information, because I guarantee you, as many people that are here, everybody's got a different opinion. Oh, they're going to get bad pharma. They're not going to be able to do well. Then you're not going to get medicine. You're not going to get these advanced drugs. So there's got to be a marriage. And the thought pretty much here is, we'll give you the generics. We'll even give you some of the ones that are coming off patent. Hell, we're going to go forward, and I'm going to make the generic version of it. You know, that's what they're doing. Just leave the expensive drugs alone. Those rare diseases, those ones that won't, God willing, not have 2 million patients to take it. Those are the ones, the biologicals, those are expensive drugs. Those will be left alone. There'll be some tiers where they're going to ask people to try one when you get into managed health care. But it's such a quagmire. I mean, people far more versed than I am in the financial end of it, the policymakers, they don't really know what's going to happen yet. Like I said, day to day, it's one day it's this and the next day it's that. But North America, United States in particular, will be the last to see that effect. You'll see more of it. Get into biosimilars, which is, people go, why don't they call that a generic? Well, generic, I can absolutely duplicate this. It's a chemical. I can make it exactly the same way. A biosimilar is just what it sounds like. It's kind of similar to the real drug. There's some blowback here in the States about, well, I want to live, so I don't want to be kind of alive. And, I mean, I'm not saying they're not bad, they're not good, because they are, but they're going to be instituted, they already are instituted overseas, and Europe's a big push behind it. But we're going to be a little lighter here in the States on that.
Rick, you'll get a chance to talk about that in our next presentation. So let me just, while we're at it, I think let's put this in context. I mean, yeah, I got the therapy for this, for a myeloma drug is going to be $125,000 a year. And guess what? I'm either going to survive or, my prolongation of life. How does that work out? I mean, we get hammered because we're a price, what about the rest of the healthcare system? I mean, how does that's all got to start to come about? I mean, we're not the only price driver here.
Exactly. It's a quagmire. It's a mess. There's no doubt about it. Everything's too expensive, and that's why any of you go to the hospital or go to the doctor, say a hospital. I had surgery myself last November. The bill was $195,000 Did my insurance company pay that? No, they did not. They did not. Did it cause me great stress? Because I'm going, oh my God, wait a minute. I can't afford to live. It's the money's gotten so crazy and out of bounds that it's inflated to what is really paid to begin with, and they hope to get an amount. So you're right, there's a lot of different drivers of none of it's real, except the cost of manufacturing and building these plants and researching these drugs. We all can get on the bandwagon. I made a mention on LinkedIn last night. They said Amazon has abandoned plans to distribute drugs. And I thought, good. I mean, it's not surprising. I want to save money. We all want to save money. But it's one thing to just say, oh, it's full of problems, it's expensive, big bad pharma. It's not that easy. It's just not that easy to do that. All these exhibitors in here are making the equipment. It's expensive. It costs money.
Well, let's look at a couple of models that we have.
Okay.
Okay. Well, let's focus on what the federal government can do. All things aside. Okay. Now, I'm not going to tell you my age, but does everybody remember?
I'm not telling mine.
I'm sure anybody who's probably 50 plus probably has sat in the airport going to San Juan, Puerto Rico more than once. If you remember what the driver was there, all right? Now that's come and gone.
It's coming back.
But the question really is that was a federal tax break. I mean, why can't we do something like this again? And I'm not just talking about relocation of stuff to a commonwealth so we can make money, but you see the biggest wave. That's how these things happen. So based on what you're looking at, is there any federal tax stuff or breaks that are coming down?
We're already seeing it. We're already seeing it. Amgen, 150, well, and the reports out there had it at 300 million, but it's $170 million plant in Rhode Island. And it was funny because everybody said that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. There's no more of these plants are being built in the United States.
But it did.
But it is. And there's going to be more. It's just math. It's just plain math. I mean, give me a break. And everybody, you know, these communities all over the country, all over the world, they want pharma plants. They want pharma bio plants. They pay more. They're good for the community. You get the best and the brightest. The research centers, all of these are very attractive to communities. It feeds the community, just like when they close. Merck pulled out in Mississippi, I want to say Pearl, Mississippi, I think it was. It was heartbreaking. After being there 30 years, the town just kind of went away. I mean, because that kind of engine supports a community. The schools, all the restaurants, real estate. I mean, it has a big impact. And Puerto Rico took a beating when the old regime left and all the laws, just new laws were put into place. At one time, 75% of our drugs that we took in the States was produced in Puerto Rico. They're going to be instituting new tax breaks there to make it just as attractive as it was. And it's a good idea because there's a wonderful, well, before the hurricane, it was a wonderful infrastructure, but sometimes wipe clean, they can start new. And there's a lot of chatter about major investment down there.
Right. Just so we're clear, I mean, anybody who's been down the road, if you looked at it when you did the analysis, this was 75%. Cost of goods coming out of Puerto Rico was higher than if we did it domestically. The trick was the federal tax rebate on the end game.
Yep.
The dirty little secret was it had to remain on the island for 7 years. So there's always a hook, you see? You didn't know that, did you? So the capital investment had to remain for 7 years. So, yeah, the point is that's an opportunity, but I think we got to play it a little more legit this time.
Yeah, and, you know, the government in place in Puerto Rico at that time, I mean, very pro-business, but there was a lot of shady things going on.
Proactive.
Proactive. I loved it. I mean, I was glad because so many people were employed in the industry. But yes, federal tax breaks. Well, like I said, Amgen was right out the gate, and that plant could have been built anywhere.
Yep.
Anywhere.
Right. Let's talk about the guys who are waiting for the, let's talk about everybody who's waiting for somebody to fall off the patent cliff. All right, we used to call them. There's always 3 or 4 guys out there getting ready for when drug A falls off, drug B falls off. So is that still a major driver here?
It's a profit killer. I mean, and they'll hold nothing back in trying to extend those patents in any way possible. But there comes a point, it's done. I do a top 10 drug list. I'm not the only one that does it, top 10, top 20 drugs. And it's so strange to watch something just go right off the chart. It's a driver for not only developing new drugs, that pipeline, keeping their pipeline is essential. And it's caused big pharma, the bigger companies that would never dream of forming partnerships to do that very thing. And so it's not just through mergers and acquisitions, it's also partnering with other companies on these money makers, the new money makers. You never would have dreamed of putting together some of these. You don't see Pfizer and Bristol Myers, well, you see them in the news today, Bristol Myers Squibb, but as partners on a drug and saying, all right, you get this market, we're going to get this market, and they're coming together to make profits. So patent cliffs, yeah, they're bad, and all the biologicals are hitting them now. But, as I said, there's biosimilars, and I guess others will talk on that more. So yeah, you've got to feed the pipeline. You've got to have a product to sell, and if you don't, you're not going to make any money.
Well, what's the corollary? I mean, if you're going to defend and your intention is to remain in cardiovascular or CNS, a lot of companies go down the 505(b)(2) route and they take it in chunks. I get 5 years here, I get 5 years there. I mean, that's got to be a key piece too.
There's no one right answer on that. It's if I had it, life would be good. If I knew how to answer that in a way to sum it up. What I will say is that goes back to what we were talking about with research and how companies are growing, because it can be $2 billion for a leading drug to take it from bench to bedside, so to speak, and have it fail. Just have it fail. Say, sorry, didn't work. Not that they're not still doing that, but they're looking at other ways to get new drugs through acquisition or partnership. I mean, the days of accelerators and incubators that are all over the country with promising research going on, Big Pharma's paying attention. Johnson & Johnson is financed. They call them J-Labs all over the country. Medical devices, pharmaceuticals. It's not just because they're a nice company and want to help out small companies thrive. They're looking for the science. They're looking for that next drug.
No, you see a lot of it. We see a lot of it. There's always some folks that have been let go from a company under good terms, of course. And part of their deal of separation was they have access to certain drugs that have been shelved. And some of this stuff is extremely successful. Some of this stuff is a complete flop. Oh. But there's a lot of ways to it. So I think the key nowadays is there's the patent strategy and there's the regulatory strategy. Yeah. Both of them give you defense. All right. While we're on the question here, while we're really reaching, let's talk about cannabis cultivation and the next big thing,
Ted and I were talking about that this morning. It's not your dad's cannabis, but it is still.
Of course it is.
It's huge. Mm-hmm. We've got $2 billion in reported projects on the books right now, and at least that many left to get. And I'm going to tell you, people say, well, what is it, a bunch of guys just sitting around? Yep, sometimes it is, and other times it's big business. These are people. I wrote one, I was researching in British Columbia. When you looked at the executives of this company, one was the former premier of British Columbia. Law enforcement, lots of law enforcement is involved in the cannabis market. They did a study in Maryland out of all the people applying for licenses, and I'm reading through it, and something like 75% were former law enforcement or federal government, or judges, DEA, And it just struck me kind of odd, but it's burst. And there's so much money. You were talking about raising capital. I had talked to a company that was going to invest $50 million. They were going to build a 2-phase cultivation processing facility over many, 5 to 10 years. I talked to one gentleman, well, actually the CEO on a Thursday. When I called back Monday, because they were in negotiations, they weren't sure with the A&E, I said, so about that phase, because we're not doing phases, we got all our funding. I go, well, you didn't have it Thursday. He goes, we could do this 3 times over. Everybody wants a piece of it. It's not going anywhere. It's real. And to see that happening, Canada wrote the book on it for North America, and it's coming now to the States, and it is viable because for every I mean, they're doing the CGMP in some cases where they're using the extractions and the capsules and the gel caps and tablets. But it's pretty strange. I never thought I'd see the day where I'd write a project talking about the right powder or flower quality. But they're doing that for right now the medical market, but they're medicinal market, but they're also looking into when the recreational market will be opened up. And there's no end in sight. And it's helping out another industry, the farmers. The guys that had the greenhouses, you're seeing a lot of happy people. That one guy I talked to, and he goes, yep, was doing tomatoes, now it's all weed. And he goes, my business is booming. Right. We've got Dutch companies coming into it. It's quite amazing.
Well, what I found amazing was that, in certain areas of New Jersey, we're very known for cultivation of flowers. So that meant that we had enormous resources of glass greenhouses. They're all gone. And I don't mean gone, I mean they're all bought. So the anticipation, New Jersey's a holdout, so there's anticipation.
Oh, yeah.
The question really is going to come down to this, and I've run across this many times. It's the legitimate aspect. It's the medical marijuana versus the recreational, because the lines blur. So, do you take 2 brownies or 2 capsules? What's it going to be, So
here's
the point
the deal.
there is, but you got to remember, there's no federal oversight.
Not yet.
Right, so therein lies the problem, right? And the answer is, in the end, FDA says it's safe and efficacious. There's rules, right? The state decides, and the state only tests. So the question's really going to, if this is going to be real and this industry is going to blow right open on the medicinal side, what do you think? I mean,
well, that's why some of the more, that company that I mentioned, the former premier of British Columbia, I mean, he's the CEO, director, founder. They're going the medicinal route. They're going encapsulation. They're acting as if. And that is a smart way to go. But they have another division for the recreational. They want to cover all the bases. But if I can come to you and say, we meet all FDA regulations. It's certified good manufacturing practice. You can dose it. You can, it's not just 2 brownies or a pill. Which one do I take? Those are the companies that we expect to see the greatest amount of profit zoom. Because you got the dispensaries and all this kind of thing going on anyway. But once it becomes legit and laws are in place, you'll see all these greenhouses that were bought up, just like every piece of land that's on a river in Canada got bought up. Quebec, I mean, it was just amazing. Then they're going to farmers, buying up 10 acres, 100 acres, and it was all on water for the irrigation, whether it was going to be, a lot of them are doing hydroponic, which is a throwback to the 70s, to hear that again. Oh, I gave my age a little bit there. But, and I only read about that.
Well, you didn't have that in your dorm room?
No. But it's interesting. It's fascinating. And there's a lot of money. I mean, and they're legit.
Yeah.
And a lot, you talked about venture capital guys. A lot of the founders and owners of these companies are them.
Right. I just find it fascinating, but we digress. Anyway, let me ask you now. So, excess capacity, empty plate. Let's just talk about. There was a time where they said if we had to step up production of any particular biologic, we couldn't do that now.
Mm-hmm.
The answer. Remember that it was the old fixed asset thing. So, what's your sense? What's having looked at the industry, are we more flexible now? Or?
Oh, well, flexible manufacturing. And again, I'm not going to step into anybody else's discussion here at the show. Single-use systems, disposable symptoms.
You're allowed.
Thank you. I made a mistake. And flex factories. I mean, that's the wave of the future for a lot of these plants. You can get a plant up and running in 18 months, from concept to plug and play. Does that mean the traditional fixed manufacturing is going to go away? No. It's just going to employ both. Mm-hmm. It's a marriage of the two. And, you'll have someone say, oh, they're done. No more stainless steel react. Well, there's going to be stainless steel reactors. And there's going to be stainless steel equipment. There's also going to be disposable equipment. And the single-use systems, for a multitude of reasons, not just cost saving or speed to market and getting up running and adding capacity. There's other issues involved in that too. That again, I'm going to let the experts speak about that specifics, but they keep building. I have learned one thing in this after doing this over 20 years. Never say this is how it's going to be, because the minute you say it, I say that they're not going to build any more big pharma manufacturing campuses. Up comes one for $2 billion. And so it's fascinating. It's a fascinating industry.
So let me ask you this then. I mean, obviously that $2 billion, that is offshore money. Novartis is not a U.S. company. Well,
Right.
let me ask you this. So what's the one top driver on a global base that pushes us? What do you think?
It would be what any company wants. More customers. There's more people. There's new markets. And a lot of and for different reasons. In emerging markets, you've got a different kind of growth coming. That's going to be more your generics. That's going to be a lot of your biosimilars. I mean, they're getting, some places are getting drugs for the very first time. It's a miracle. What we take for granted here, take an antibiotic, that's a miracle drug to somebody who's never had medication. So that's the kind of growth they're seeing. And then you come here, again, people that had a death sentence can now live. And it's different needs for different people, but everybody's growing. There's more people. And then of the existing population, we're getting older. There's more of us living a long time. And we need different kinds of drugs than, someone my age needs a different drug than someone in their 20s or 30s. That's as much as I'm giving up there. And it involves just a higher customer base. So yes, that's the number one driver. You've got more customers, more conditions to feed for different reasons. And don't even get me started on the lifestyle drugs to keep us aging in place in a good way that aren't even medically necessary, that just make you look better and feel better from a cosmetic standpoint. That's a huge sector driving. But if I had to sum it up for everything, there's more people. And that's a wonderful thing for any company. It's virtually every human being on the planet. I mean, we're seeing development in Africa where that was unheard of. Literally every corner of the world is building up and gearing up. Different product, but product nevertheless.
Yeah, I've seen that myself. But let me ask you another question. While we're talking about the global aspect. So everybody and their sister blames Brexit on something. All right, So my question is, and if I didn't ask it, I would be remiss. So in our industry, was it a big who cares, or was it a factor?
Yes.
Brexit? It is.
Yes, to both.
Okay.
Who cares? And yes, because it still remains to be seen what's going to happen. They've moved the EMA, the European Medicines Agency, our sister, some would say brother agency, I say sister agency to the FDA. They're moving to Amsterdam. There's a lot of regulatory problems. It's like if all of a sudden we declared New York City, we're done. We're moving out. We're our own little entity. Well, all those benefits that applied to being part of the state of New York are gone. It's like a foreign entity, and that's what the fear is. How are they going to get over that regulatory nightmare? How's that going to affect investment? Hopefully, they're going to grandfather all of this in, but when I say that there's meetings and forums and conferences to deal with this, because the UK is a huge component of the pharmaceutical biotech industry anywhere, never mind just Europe. And many companies are headquartered there as well, are sourced from there. So we haven't seen any wholesale closings of plants or anything like that. But there's a little slowdown right now, just waiting to see what's going to shake out. The thought is that a lot of this, like I said, is going to be grandfathered, and they're not going to treat the UK as a foreign nation. But they're going to jump through some hoops, and there's going to be money lost. But it doesn't benefit anybody to remove all the trade agreements and export. I mean, it really is a mess. At the end of the day, it's going to cost some money. It'll employ a lot of people figuring it out, but it's not going to have as big of an impact. I think the biggest impact we had right now is moving the EMA to Amsterdam, because now Italy's mad because they want it there. So we can always fight about something. They're not so mad that it's going to Amsterdam. They're mad that it's not going there because they claim we're the API kings and it should be here. So there's always something.
Who's the API king now? I missed that.
Italy.
Italy.
Who knew? But no, I mean, they legitimately do make a lot of APIs there. It's just,
Okay.
That's the biggest initial thing, but I don't think we're going to see plants start shutting down. I mean, unless I'm wrong, and I could be wrong, I'm being honest. In this industry, you never know what's coming next. But it doesn't really make sense that they would do that.
The sense I got was most of the big global companies kind of contracted already, and that I think would have more impact. So I have the tendency to agree with you.
Yeah, it's...
Okay.
Yeah, it's just been a little slow. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette.
Pharmaceutical Processing, in conjunction with Interfex 2018, presents Interfex Live.